So we now have in recent weeks this discussion about the Trevelyan apology in the context of Grenada, the reparations, etc. And we have people in Ireland immediately turning to whether we should have an apology for Charles Edward Trevelyan from the Trevelyan family. Nobody is talking, that I'm aware of, about the issue of reparations.
But I want to begin with you, Mr. Connor, Dr. Connor. And first of all, thank you for agreeing to appear on the Bob Report on such short order.
Okay. Samuel is a good name, so I'm not put out by the mistake at the beginning. And thank you very much for having me along. I penned a short article last week, and I didn't expect that it was the ticket to being here with you on this Sunday afternoon.
Well, yes, as an avid researcher, I try to bring proper context to our viewers and listeners. But I do want to share the article so that our viewers can be able to contextualize your conversation in the reparative justice conversation. Of course, you are from Ireland. Ireland historically has also been victims of colonialism and oppression by the United Kingdom. It seems as though they oppressed everyone from north to south. But let us get to your article. I'm quoting from it. You say the recent announcement that Laura Trevelyan and members of her family had apologized for their ancestors' role in historical slavery, not surprisingly led to calls in Ireland for Trevelyan to address the role of Sir Charles Trevelyan, the role Sir Charles Trevelyan played during the Irish famine. In 1834, George Trevelyan, a Church of England clergyman and brother of Sir Charles Trevelyan, enslaved people across 6 plantations in Grenada. George Trevelyan received one of the largest compensation packages from the British Exchequer when the law forced him to free over 1,000 enslaved men, women, and children. Now, you go on to talk about the Irish question in the article here, the role that the Trevelyan family played in the Irish famine. So could you give us some context in respect of that particular Trevelyan family that is coming to Grenada and the historic role in the Irish famine in Ireland?
Of course. So the Trevelyan family are a very old English family. Their home in Somerset dates back to the 1450s. And so there's a long succession of Trevelyan occupation in that part of Britain. And they, as a family, were involved in politics. They were involved in the church, in the military, as administrators and civil servants. So a very long history of public service. The relevant individual for the purposes of today is Sir John Trevelyan, born in 1735 or thereabouts. And John Trevelyan married Louisa Simond, and Louisa brought into the marriage plantations and enslaved persons in the Caribbean, specifically in Grenada. And as a couple, they had a large number of children. And when we look at 1834 and we see the compensation records, we see in those records one of John Trevelyan's sons, the Reverend Walter Trevelyan. We see 2 of his sons, Walter's sons. We see Harriet Neve, and Harriet is interesting because she was a widow, and her husband was George Trevelyan, another one of the sons of John Trevelyan. And I will come back to that couple in a moment. Mm-hmm. But 2 of their children also feature in the compensation records: George Trevelyan, 1764 to 1871, and John Thomas Trevelyan, 1799 to 1844. The person who doesn't feature in the records is Sir Charles Edward Trevelyan. And Charles Edward Trevelyan was a highly educated man. He excelled at school, at college. He gets involved with the British East India Company, moves to India and becomes a colonial administrator there. And interestingly, he marries Hannah Moore, who is the daughter of Zachariah Macaulay, the abolitionist. And later in life, we see Charles Edward Trevelyan making his way back to England around 1838. And in 1840, he's made an assistant at the Treasury, and he decides to remain on in England at that job. And then we move forward 5 years to 1845, and we have the outbreak of the Great Famine in Ireland. And I think by way of context, it's really important to understand a number of things about where Ireland was at that point in time. So firstly, Ireland is governed from Westminster. There is no parliament in Dublin. The parliament in Dublin was abolished in 1800. So we have MPs, members of parliament in London, making laws that are applied to Ireland and to all of Great Britain. And in Ireland, individuals are sent to that parliament, but it is not, those that are sent do not reflect the population of Ireland. They're not democratically elected as such. Because if you take the part of the world, the part of Ireland that I'm sitting in right now, our population was well over 300,000 people, but we had only approximately 2,000 people who had the right to vote. So those leaving to go to Westminster were of the aristocratic class, Anglo-Irish, predominantly Protestant, and they were not representative of the population generally. So 1845, we have this terrible catastrophe comes about where the potato crop fails. And the potato crop, it was a crop that fed the majority of people. It was not a diverse food system. And immediately the consequences are terrible. People started to die in very large numbers. And by the end of the famine in 1852, we have at least 1 million people dead. We have at least 1 million people who've left the country. And by 1855, the number is over 2 million. So we've had death and immigration at a catastrophic level. This ultimately utterly destroys the fabric of Irish society, fabric of Irish culture. And it embeds in public memory a very strong resentment against Britain. And that resentment feeds nationalism and ultimately takes us to a century ago where we gain independence for 26 counties of the 32. Now that independence was taken, it was not given. And so we've now had a century of independence. So what role does Charles Edward Trevelyan play in all of this? And I take you back to Mrs. Payne Banfield's wonderful conversation in your previous item. She talks about the role of the civil servant. And the civil servant doesn't make policy. Civil servant is not a politician. He is an implementer of government policy. So Charles Edward Trevelyan was the principal implementer of government policy in Ireland, the response to this terrible catastrophe. So we have under the Robert Peel government, the Tory government, an initial positive response, but it's totally inadequate. And then Robert Peel loses office and John Russell becomes Prime Minister. And John Russell's thinking is very much aligned with that of Charles Edward Trevelyan. So the thinking is laissez-faire economics, let the market bring a response and relief to this catastrophe in Ireland. The market will supply the food. So as a consequence of that, food exports out of Ireland are not prohibited. And we have in 1847, Black 47, some would say it was the worst year of the famine. I would say there were many other worst years. So we have large-scale death, people dying on the roadside, people dying in their houses, thousands of people dying in workhouses. And ultimately, the authorities in London wake up to the fact that this is not working. So they introduce a level of relief. That relief is wholly inadequate. And as a consequence, death, starvation, death from disease. So, for example, in the little part of Ireland that I come from, it is estimated that 27,000 people died from dysentery and other such illnesses. So, by 1852, Charles Edward Trevelyan was very deeply embedded in the public memory of Irish people as being the villain of Irish history, the man who was responsible for the famine catastrophe. And his name is immortalized in our folklore and in our culture and our music. So we have a song called The Fields of Athenry, which is sung at sporting occasions, etc., several times a year. And in that song, the lyrics relate to an individual who is deported from Ireland or transported from Ireland to the penal colonies because he has stolen Trevelyan's corn. So he has robbed a food convoy or something like that and is punished for it. So Charles Trevelyan is seen very much as being the villain of Irish history. Now, that is public memory and that is folklore, and you've got to contrast that with academic history. And in more recent times, academic history has become much, I think, softer or kinder to Charles Trevelyan, and that is in part down to the fact that people are starting to engage more with the history, with the documents, and with the records. And this other version paints him as being misunderstood. Some of the very callous things that he said about the Irish famine are things like it was, divine providence, etc. So he's seen as being misunderstood, but crucially, going back to Mrs. Payne Banfield's commentary, he's seen as being an implementer of policy that is decided by government, and therefore he is not seen as being the architect of this catastrophe. He is merely an implementer of what the Russell government, the negligent approach they took to dealing with famine. So we then move to today, and 1997, we have discussions happening in Ireland around the future of Northern Ireland, which remains part of the United Kingdom. And in that context, we have a statement allegedly from Tony Blair, which talks about the mistakes made by John Russell's government and the inadequate response. And the Irish people embrace that as being an apology. It is taken as an apology, and it helps with achieving consensus around getting things done in Northern Ireland. Subsequently, we see that Tony Blair did not write the statement. In fact, he did not even see the statement. It was issued by his one of his aides, who could not get hold of him at the time. So it wasn't really an apology. It was a political statement at the time for a very good purpose, and that achieved good things. But it was not an apology for the famine. So we now have, in recent weeks, this discussion about the Trevelyan apology in the context of Grenada, the reparations, etc. And we have people in Ireland immediately turning to whether we should have an apology for Charles Edward Trevelyan from the Trevelyan family. Nobody is talking, that I'm aware of, about the issue of reparations. So that's it in a nutshell.
Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Bub Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.